Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 264 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today, we're primarily looking at Nehemiah chapter 11. Now, I just want to open up with these first few verses here because it's going to definitely help the commentary out. Now, the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, but the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9/10 remained in the other cities, more or less in the countryside, rather. Now, I just want to say, I know the casting of lots is not something we do today. The reason why we don't do it today is because we have the Holy Spirit. Once the Holy Spirit was poured out upon the people in the New Testament scriptures, we never read of the casting of lots again, at least of those in the church. So the last time that we see the casting of lots take place is when the 11 remaining disciples are choosing one to replace Judas. And that's when Matthias is selected by the casting of lots. However, this was all occurring before the Holy Spirit had been poured out on the day of Pentecost. So just wanted to give that little intro there. Now, a city, what is a city without a population? And so as they've been building the city back up, the people aren't really moving into it. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One is there was still a lot of work to probably be done in cleaning up the city. The other is what really, to look at it from a purely secular standpoint, what revenue income would there be if somebody was to build in the city? What benefits would there be? The city really, in many ways, only had its real time of revenue when people would come to the temple or during the feast times, again, when people were coming to the temple. So that's when the people of the city would have really have been making money, or serving the leaders, which it says were living in the city. And again, Jerusalem is the capital city at that time, the capital city today. But the people were slow coming in. I think there was also the factor of, even though they had rebuilt the walls, even though they had hung new gates to the city, there still is this issue of security. If an enemy comes, they're going to come to attack the city. The farmlands, if you were out in the remote cities, you're not really a target. And even if the enemy is passing through your area, you could run away. You could easily flee. But if you're in the city, once the enemy approaches, the gates are closed and there's no way out for you. And I think there was still enough people realized this would have been primarily the children and the grandchildren of those who were there when the Babylonians had attacked the city. They had heard the stories. There's a few older people who had lived it. They knew what it was like to be trapped in the city. They knew what it was like for people to even go in the direction of cannibalism. So I think that is a part of that reluctantness. However, I will also say this. This is saying 1 out of 10 people to move to the city. And you may think at first, well, that's not a lot. But did you know in history, it's only in the most recent of times that people have started gravitating out of the rural communities and into the cities. And I could carry this much further back, but let's just start from 1900. In 1900 America, only 14% of the population lived in cities. So that is really staggering when you realize those numbers. By 1950, and that's post-war era, and that was really when there started being this push of people leaving the rural communities and moving into the cities. It really came about as the soldiers returned home. They didn't want to live on the farms anymore. Many of them had seen the cities of Europe, and they longed to have that city life, and they longed to have some of the objects that they had seen that other people had, and they felt this was much more obtainable in the cities. So by the 1950s, 30% of the population of America was living in the cities. Today, it's much greater than that. I don't have an accurate percentage, but I would say we're probably around 70 to 75% of the population now lives in the cities. And the cities are taxed. You can see it in the traffic. You can see it in the violence. It creates a great breakdown almost in society when people are living in the cities. And it also creates a need. But that's getting off into some personal opinion, I guess. I just want to say here, though, it's this question of who's going to come and fill the city. The city needs people. It needs people to defend it. It needs people to serve the leaders there. It needs to have life in it again, to show the nations around that God has indeed remembered his people. And that's one of the issues, that you still have these people who are basically criticizing Israel, saying, oh, you can't do this. You can't come back and rebuild. That's some of what we even hear today, right? I also wanted to point out in here, it speaks of the temple servants. And I wanted to come back and really reinforce who these people are, because I made mention, and this was now months and months back, I made mention that we would hear of these people once again, but it's not speaking of them directly by the name that we would have been familiar with. The temple servants, those who get water, those who get the firewood, those who do all of the little service in the temple, those are the Gibeonites of old. And remember, the Gibeonites are the ones who tried to deceive Joshua. Well, they did deceive Joshua and the elders, saying that they had traveled from a great distance, and they took old leather bags, and they took moldy bread, and they had all this stuff, and asked Joshua if he would sign a treaty with them. And they're thinking, well, these people have come so far away. Well, of course we'll sign a treaty with them. And they hastily signed a treaty that they would not attack or wipe out the people, that they would be friends, only to discover that they were the next city over the hill. And they had been tricked and deceived, but they had signed this treaty. But what they ended up doing to punish the people for their deception was that the people would now have to serve them, where they would end up building a house for God. And again, I hesitate using the terminology house for God, but that's the terminology used there. Of course, God doesn't dwell in the house, but that was the worship center for the people. So they served in the tabernacle. They then served in Solomon's temple, and now they're going to come back and serve in Zerubbabel's temple as well. So these Gibeonites of old, even though they were deceivers, they still had this place to where they are serving the Jewish people, and primarily serving the leaders. Just wanted to point that out, because way back, months back, I mentioned that we'll see them again, and here we're seeing them again. The 1 out of 10, it really is this aspect of a tithe of the people. And let me ask you, if you had the opportunity of serving the Lord, would you step up? Would you volunteer? And I point that out because in verse 2 it says, and the people blessed all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. So we kind of get this sense of that, one, there's being lots cast to choose some to serve, but there's another group of people who said, just put my name down. I'll serve. I will move into Jerusalem, my family and I. And how blessed are the volunteers. So much of ministry could not happen without volunteers. I know it from my own work. In a church service, you see the pastor, you see the music leader up in the front, or maybe even the youth pastor. You see these roles of people who are serving and performing the work, but you oftentimes don't notice those who are working the sound system, or those who are ushering, those who are cleaning the church, those who are keeping the church grounds, or maybe if it's a large church, you don't necessarily see those who are the parking attendants. There's so many roles in a church, and they shouldn't, I don't even believe they should be paid roles. I think that they are roles of service. And yet at the same time, we need to bless those people too. Whether we're blessing them with prayers or whether we're blessing them, just telling them thank you, or maybe even giving them a little gift to show appreciation. I think that maybe the blessing that was given in part was saying, hey, we'll help you build your house, or we'll help you, move your items in. Or, hey, here's a few dollars. We can't move in ourselves, but and we know you're not going to have any crops. Here's some fruits and vegetables. We'll bring you some items from our farm every now and then. That was one of the difficulties if you did live in the city, is you suddenly didn't have the farmland to work and to raise your family with food coming out of your crops. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out there. First, again, as I said, the Gibeonites are back on the scene, and then these people who are willing to volunteer. Consider, what are you willing to volunteer for? Are you willing to say, I'll help with that new church plant? Now, what if some of the churches that have, 500 or more members, if they said, we're going to take 10% of our congregation and cut it and send it to help start this new church? That'd be a really boost and a start for a new church. Yet, so many people would say, why would I want to do that? Well, it's to help expand the gospel, to help expand the ministry of the Lord. And this is how the nation of Israel is being built back, is they're saying, hey, we need a few volunteers. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope that your day's gone well. Until tomorrow, God bless.